Thank you, everyone, for coming back to Symbiosis Weekend. And we are very happy to have Janine Mitchell with us to show us a behind-the-scenes look at how she works. So I think we're all in for a treat. And once she can figure out, how to do the camera thing, she is going to take it away. So whenever you're ready, Janine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The camera's looking at the floor, I think, Janine.
Yes, I've got to turn it around. I'm trying to get there, but it's not. It's good to go. Excellent. That was fun, wasn't it? Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for coming to a demonstration without really having any idea what I was going to be demonstrating. So that shows some faith, most definitely. I thought what I would actually do is simply share how I work. During the course of the year, I've actually not done a lot of formal work at all, really. Probably I haven't done any formal pen work. And so I thought it might be interesting just to see how I go about approaching a page, and maybe talking a little bit about some of the papers that I use, how I use brushes and how I palette brushes, etc. And basically just a little bit about how I go about re-warming up when it's been a while since I've had a pen in hand, and what sorts of things I do to get a little bit of inspiration, and how I just puddle with paint, essentially. I thought I would just start off with my pens because they were all sitting in a box, and I thought I'd better get them out tonight to be sharing. I think, pens are a very personal thing. This holder is something that I have from my days when I had a shop front, and I worked on this with Len Bellman specifically to make something that could hold 1 million different nib sizes, because it always drove me crazy that I couldn't have small nibs. So I have a little jar of all these things sitting around with every nib size known to man, so that I can just pick up a pen and start working. This one from Miles Calligraphy. I've always loved these because they've got a really, really nice grip for me, and I use them quite a lot. And this one, of course, for the colour. And this one is what we named the Budgie Quill. I know Deirdre's probably on, but this tiny little nib, which I really, really love, but which requires very, very slow writing. So I'm going to try to just give a little bit about pens first, nibs and some of the papers and everything. I typically am working a lot with these antique nibs. They were better made in the old days, I have to say. They really knew how to make things. And, when I think about working on a page, let me just get a little dip of some Sumi. These pens, need some water, these pens work in a much more smooth way. They're cut fine, they work beautifully, and they take a lot of mistreatment, which is probably what I tend to do with my pens. Now you'll see I'm looking to get this so that it's not dropping out as much, and I do water down my Sumi as I work, but it's quite warm here inside because it's very cold outside, and it's been quite hot the last couple of days. So this is how I warm up, and you can see I don't worry if I get splats or whatever. I'm really just trying to get my hand working and get the ink to a texture that I'm happy with. And for Tom, I'll just say I'm starting on bleed-proof paper. This is Schollershammer Markers pad, but I always actually do my work on the real thing. And there you go. So you can see it's starting to change in consistency, and that's actually quite a lot of water that I'm adding to get that movement. Otherwise, I can only do very slow writing work. Now, I think people make the mistake. If I write nice and slow, it's fine. People make the mistake of staying on layout paper. And then when they get to the real thing, they're terrified. And I think it's very important to get used to the real thing sooner rather than later. Now, normally I'd warm up much longer than that, but seeing as we only have an hour, we'll put up with whatever comes down. This is, let me just turn this around. This is Cartier Magnani, and it's a Portofino paper. Don't know if you can just see that there. This is the paper that I used for the whole of the paper book. It's a beautiful paper. These are from old batches. They're not the latest make. This is from when the mill was still running. And going back, to those times, the paper was actually very, very good quality. Now, I'm just wondering if I can get this light a bit better for you guys. Why have I got a dark spot? I hope you can all see that well enough. I'm just going to do a little bit of something. And my little bit of something will be off to the side. I did draw some lines up to do some music in a minute, but when I think about working, I actually like the feeling that things just happen all over the page. And so if I'm looking at something like, say, a little bit of Van den Velde, and you can see on this paper that it does pick up fluff, and you need to be just prepared to keep an eye on what's happening there. But you can see on this paper that it deals with ink really, really beautifully, and it will also deal with paint really beautifully. So just let me have a little wash out, and I'll just show you some painting as well, and then I'll do some writing. Now, I work pretty well exclusively these days with these pots of watercolor paint that are made by Artistic Isle, and she hand molds them, and this space gives me a place to actually go about paletting my brush. Now, this brush is really old, and you'll see that I can actually, I don't know if you can see that well enough, but you can see I'm actually rolling that brush because I'm after the fine tip. Hopefully you can see that. If I don't do that, if I leave it just in here, let me just get a bit more water in here. What you'll see is that I lose the tip. So I'm really focused on, if I'm going to do something, that I have enough of a fine head on that brush, so that if I wanted to do something right up on the tip, and let me just see if I can get a little bit lower with this camera so you can see properly. If I'm right up on the tip, I need a little more water, just bear with me. I'm not used to all these lights and cameras over my working space. That I can, on the very tip of the brush, also do some very fine work, like a Van den Velde or something else. Now, obviously, I would work this up longer to get used to it, but I want to just do a little bit of talking about paint as well. So from a painting perspective, what I often find is that people just use too much. You can see here I've still got a bit of residual on the brush. I don't worry about adding it where I am, and I don't mind actually watering it down even more. Let me just come up here a bit more. Just going to see if I can get more light. Right through to full strength. But while that's wet, I actually am quite happy to work other colours into that paint and sort of almost slush it around a bit. As long as the edge is still wet, you can keep working it, and you can add all kinds of things really to that. Once it's dry, of course, then you can end up with a harsh line. And if that happens, you can still rework it as long as you just dab a little bit of water off, and you can almost just tease this paint back into a more blended mix. And I end up almost dotting. You can see it just very gently moves the paint around so that it's a soft edge. Similarly, if I come back in here, now if the paint's too wet, you sometimes have to wait a little bit longer, or you can just leave it natural and let the paint go where the paint goes. But obviously these are quite different looks, and you have to decide what your preference is. Now this bronze that I was using for a lot of the work, which is a particularly beautiful colour, I'll just have a little dip in here. This is probably one of the most beautiful colours that I really enjoyed working with. And if you make a shape, you can very quickly outline it and fill it to get actually a really thick coverage, or you can do something with a bit more water, and you can have it heavy in one side and light in the other. So when I was painting the book pages, where I was doing quite a lot of this sort of work, and I was doing it very heavy, a lot of the time I was actually retouching back into that work. Similarly, I was going back into the watercolor, and you can see I can just puddle around in here if I want more whimsy or less whimsy as part of the working. Now I'm just going to let that dry a little bit for a minute off to the side. And then I'm just going to show the difference between, say, working on what I was just working on and maybe something like a mat board. Now, one of the things that I discovered while I was making my pieces was this wonderful, I'm a bit in love with this pen, a Uni Jetstream. It's actually an oil-based pen. I don't know if you can see that there. And what that means is that once this is down, I can do whatever I like across the top of it, and it actually doesn't really matter. So nothing smudges on it after it's dry, and it can get a little bit of an edge to it, you know, as you rule the lines. But from a musical perspective, which is obviously, you know, one of the things that I really loved about the work that I'm doing, it enabled me to basically work across the top of it. It means the lettering is still at risk, but basically your ability to add watercolor is really, really good. You can keep working over the top. Now, when I work on something like a mount board, which this is, I used to just go to the framer and ask them for all their, can you give me all your leftovers? It's quite textured. And the difference between this and something like the watercolor paper is that it's slower. And so you can work on here, you know, if I wanted to, again, do that long stroke, and I want to just have this really slow speed. So I've got total control over what's going on in the page. And as I am working here, then it may not be as fine as something else. Let me just try to get a bit closer so I can see what I'm writing. But it basically means that you can do it without having too many hairs in the way of what you're doing. So if I did something like this and I wrote the whole page, and I wanted to add something to it. I might just very simply, excuse my voice, just add some colour without too much care, really. And you can see I'm not even really waiting for it to dry. It's a little bit just letting things go where things go, letting colours mix, letting colours thin. And essentially I'm making it a little more, I don't want to say arty-farty, but I'm just sort of trying to soften off really the harshness of the normal sort of very still formal writing that we do. And if I take the edges away, then obviously it has a very different feeling to it. Now, if I keep writing, and I'm just going to change to the budgie quill, so you'll see this little one back again, and I can't remember the number of this, but I can always have a look if people are interested. Now this nib needs very, very slow writing. I'm just going to show it on the layout paper first. And it's very, very tiny writing. I don't have enough ink on here.
What is the size of that writing, Janine?
There's my fingernail.
Okay. Minimum.
What's that? About 3 mils from the side here with the camera in my way. So it's
Okay.
tiny. Oh, it's
Right.
tiny, and I just wrote on myself. How typical of a calligrapher. Let me get that ink off. I see I'm home again. You'll have to put up with the ink. Can I go smaller? Yes, I can. And so the benefit of changing nibs and working very slow is that you can get some very fine lettering. So you can see the nib really makes a difference to the size of the work that you're doing. And if you want to do something really formal and small, then you can change your nib. As opposed to if I go back to working with the other pen, sorry, I'm just trying to get some of this ink off my finger. You can work this small, but it won't be as fine. You don't get the same level of hairline. And so I change nibs a lot, depending on what I'm doing. So again, you can see it's still quite small, but it has a different feeling about it. Now, if I was to then change to something even thicker and heavier, this is an EF66 nib, and this nib is the nib that you use if you want some weight on what you're doing. So I'm getting very messy because I can't see my things in for the camera, for the phone in my face. So if I want to be darker again, if my pen will cooperate. And I can use something like this where the nib spreads. And this is obviously really good if you, I'm not holding my ink. If you want to do something thick. Just give me one sec. That's better. So depending on what you want to do, you can change pens. And you can see because it holds a lot of ink, you've got to keep refilling it. Now it's been a while since I've done anything copper platey. There you go, Margaret Burgess. But you can see the difference and getting contrast, obviously, with just one tool, rather than having to change with broad pen or anything else. And obviously, for this sort of thing, that is the enabler of more contemporary types of scripts. And what I often do is I will take something like an old document like this, and I will find something that I like the look of. Find something to look of. It's a little bit interesting. Say, can you see this? Let me just get it under the screen here. So you've got this sort of writing here, and I might use this as, you know, some sort of influence where I begin by going, okay, what does it look like? Okay, it's sort of got a bit of a wobble here. Need a big bit of ink to do this part here. I'm just gonna not be too concerned about anything. You'll see the re-inking is real. And you can see as I'm doing it, I'm already starting to just change the character of that writing a little bit because I want to use what it has as an influence. Now I could keep going here. I'm just going to hit that little spot here. We might just go through the other side. And you've got to be aware that you can flex this nib really, really well. So then I might think about doing things like, how do I change this? So I might think about elongating it more, tightening it. And I'm still trying to keep the character of the thing. Something born of what it came from, but modernizing it ever so slightly. Just getting some ink off my finger again. Sorry, I don't know why I'm so inky. I haven't used any Sumi for ages. Forgot how messy it is. So each time I play, I will be going, how do I keep the character? I'll just tidy that up. Keep the character of it, but start to think, how might I change this for some sort of contemporary something? And I would continue doing things like that. Then I might start to go, actually, I can think about, how do I stretch it? Sorry about all my ink, I can't get it off my finger. This will be a very entertaining, not so clean video. And I'll start to think about, how do I stretch this now? So I might go the other direction and start to put some distance into this, because each time I'm thinking about, how do I still keep where it came from but change something that modernizes it? So this is the way that I go about working, trying to make new scripts and come up with different ideas about how I approach things, basically so that I'm not just always doing some formal something. Obviously, once you've learned a formal script, you can keep writing it. But I think it's actually nice to get some of the character of you into the work. And the only way to get the character of you is to look for other influences and try to bring them to your hand, as it were. Just going to move that little inky thing out of the way. Now, coming back to this little something here, now you can see the character of this starting to dry, which I think is very, very beautiful. I'm a real fan of watercolor. I think it's one of the most interesting things that you can use to change the nature of the work without too much effort at all, and letting it have some of its freedom, is obviously quite a beautiful thing. But let me just put a couple of something down here so that we've got something to work with. Now you see what I was saying before of using a pointed pen on here. I don't know if you can see this on the video, but you've got to watch for these little fibers that you pick up, otherwise you'll get exactly that. And you can see, I don't know if you can see that it's still there. And so what I would do is then just pinch that out with a tissue and come back to the page. So you've got to be quite prepared to spend time if you want to work on certain watercolor papers. My other favorite paper is BFK Reeves, and that is incredibly hairy. But despite the pain of it, I still try to work with that again. But you can see all these little fibers that are hanging around here, and you've almost got to just try to work around them. So if I don't get too hung up here with, again, is it too neat? Where does it go? Let's just pretend maybe I'm making a little bit of music again, and I'm just going to get a little bit of speed behind this because I want to show a couple of other things. Because one of the things I'd love to see more of online is people using real ink and real nibs, not just parallel pens and fine liners and things like that. I think losing some of that skill is a sadness to me. I say, what am I writing? I don't know what I'm writing. So you can see I picked up a hair, but I tend not to just get too worried about it being perfect. That's the Marina influence. You know, if you worry too much about what's coming down.
You do it perfect even when you don't mean to do it perfect. So
So let's just have that's a little something just to play with. And then I've been using, lost my brush on my table. Where's my brush? Here's my brush. I've been using my brush just to add either the same shapes that I was doing as part of my work. And obviously I've got quite an affinity to these. You can see I'm so used to painting, I don't necessarily need to get it nice and clean. And I also don't worry that I'm going over the top of things. I think that's, for me, part of the joy of having it mingle. Now, normally I'd wait for it to dry, but we only have a short time. And so I'm obviously just going to paint quite quickly and let some of these things just go where they go.
So Janine, these are not letters at the moment, are they? They are little.
No, right now I'm just doing just decorative. I'm not writing as writing as I was in my work. So this is just for the purpose of demonstrating, you know, how I might work something in between a series of spaces.
And has the colour got that beautiful bronzy colour in it, what you're painting with?
So I've got two palettes going. So those two that I was showing, it's the same two, but you'll see I don't worry actually if I get paint in my paint, because I think, you know, that comes down to the page, and I really quite like the fact that you get variation. And if I wasn't getting that variation, let's say, you know, none of that was coming in here, I'd quite happily dunk in here and add some in. And that's how I go about, you know, trying to get more interest in the watercolor than just as if I painted it. Now I'm painting more fast than I would normally, without worrying about whether it's.
could you write at any time just a word with this alphabet? A short word.
Can I write one?
Could you write just
Yeah,
for
sure,
people
sure.
to see the alphabet and how it works? Could you write a short word in your
I'll do
petal alphabet, let's say?
I'll do that in a second. Let me just do my time check. Yes, I'll do it in a second.
Did you put a name to, have you named your alphabet?
No, I was just saying that the petals speak. I haven't really talked about some sort of naming convention. So just finishing the way that I'm thinking about, if I had a couple of lines of text here, and I might work this whole section so that I've got color across the page. But I could also do, you know, something like what I was doing here before, and then it would be a little more abstract. And if I don't worry too much about how that sort of comes, is it heavy, is it light? And I would normally treat my brush a little bit better than this, but I don't want to run out of time. So you can see, you know, just by doing really quick things, that you can get all sorts of things that are interesting. And I just like to soften, you know, a little bit of that harshness off, and you can tell that it, you know, would be something that looked quite interesting. And here's one I started to play with earlier, where you can just see how the lines basically end up merging as a little piece. And just to keep my mentor happy, because that's very important that I keep my mentor happy, I'm just going to take just going to take this here, and down here we'll pretend that we're writing. What word do you want me to write?
Anything.
All right, I'm going to write word. How does that? It's a nice short word.
Great. Short.
And the whole idea I wanted when I was doing this work was that I actually wanted the change and in the depth of colour, and I wanted it to keep. Stop talking while I just do a little nice swing around here. I wanted the depth of colour to be changing. So, and if you make an outline, you can fill it, and then you'll get a heavier coverage. And at times I do need to get that fine point because I want something that's more fine. So you'll see I'm looking to keep the shape delicate. And these are all obviously, you know, influenced by my calligraphic history. But one of the things I liked about doing this was that I could really change the line rhythm. Always just watch for those hairs when you're on the watercolour paper. Now, sometimes I did add extra little bits. Other times I didn't. So it really depended on my mood. I'm going to write words. So when I was doing the overlay, of course, there was one layer and then another layer, and that's really what added the complexity to the line. Now, this is not dry, but I'm going to risk it anyway, just so you can see that it really needs both to be effective. So if it bleeds, we'll live with it. But overlaying is what I think gave it really that complex interest. I don't mind a little bit of bleeding. Much harder when you're trying to keep your hand out of the wet paint. So I changed the size, I changed the colour, I just added simple little somethings. Sometimes I added the other colour back in. and just let it go where it goes. So you can see if you come back and you do this after it's dry, then you would have to work basically to re-wet the space that it's in. But everything that you do is workable. It's one of the reasons why I love working with watercolor. And you can see if you start to work these things, you really get a beautiful blend. And if I didn't like this, for example, I would come back and work this. And if this was,
You should take,
sorry, go on.
yeah, you should take note of, for example, how many hours just one piece takes. Because you see, nowadays, when you go into an exhibition on fashion or haute couture or something like that in the museums, you
Yep.
have the hours that took to make that dress. And that seems to be something.
Geez, I wish I'd done that
So-
at the start of the year.
Yeah. Okay, but you can do it the next time, and
Yes,
people can judge depending on the amount of work. But I think it's interesting to keep track on that. It would be
Yeah, no, I
very
agree.
very
sort of know
unique in the
roughly.
future.
Yeah, I sort of know roughly, but it's not quite accurate because it'd be like I'd stop work and then I'd work all night and I'd be doing that for
No, so that's
several
why
months. It's
like
not really
yeah,
a true representation.
well, yeah.
But I'll keep that in mind. I was just going
Well,
to.
but I was very surprised when seeing exhibitions in Europe this year, where the garments, mainly the most important ones, have had the many hours they took. They didn't say if it was the same hand, if it was the same one solo person doing it, but it would say how many hours it took to be done.
Well, I'll start
Well,
doing
you
that.
should do that.
It's sort of like doing it what I do at work. It's, keeping records. I was just quickly going to show. See, if you start like this, where you keep things too separate, you end up with this line that's not really that attractive. And so you have to work either to bring things together, keep the paint moving with each other. Or live with the line. And similarly, even the outside edge of this, if I want it to move, it's almost never too late. If I want to soften things, I'm always happy to keep playing. And you'll see I'm doing that very gently. So I'm still looking after my brush. I might look like I'm tearing it about the place, but I'm actually being very gentle with the hairs. And each time I'm thinking about how can I soften off the edge. Do I want a harsh edge? And you can see I can't turn my pad, so I've got to use my left hand, and then try to just tease this out a little bit. So you can see each time I'm just working to soften things. For me, paint and sumi and writing and pulling all of these things together, they're almost an integral part of working together. If I just saw writing in a piece, it doesn't move me in the same way as even just looking. I just love this little square. I could add a little tiny piece of writing to the bottom of this and I'd be a perfectly happy camper. So that gives you some idea of a little bit of the process that I went through. Now I'm conscious it's 11:48. Dorothy, shall I keep going? Do you want me to take any questions before I keep talking more?
Yeah, are there any questions for Janine? I think there are some comments about, that it's really nice to see the pace at which you work. It's interesting to see how you use an old script to develop your writing. Yeah, so there are comments. Okay, question, how do you take care of the brushes, nibs too, to make them last a long time?
So brush wise, I always want to argue with people about brushes. People do terrible things to brushes, but the most important thing about the brush, typically speaking, is that you're always running in the direction of the ferrule. So you're not, when I'm scrubbing around, I'm not actually, killing the hairs. I'm doing it very, very gently. But to look after it, you can see I'm always rolling it back to a point. But when I'm cleaning the brush, I'm just going to take my ring to do this. When I'm cleaning a brush, I actually roll the brush in my hand until there's no paint left. And you can just simply wipe that off. And you can see if you do this in the direction of the hairs, the brush is not tortured. It'll dry beautifully. And I've had this brush now, this one probably, I don't know, probably about 20, maybe 30 years. And it's still beautiful with a point. And, as you say, I can get a lovely fine line and everything out of it. But I also like just adding, let me just, I can't see where I'm dipping over here. I like to just add not quite enough. So you can see this is not happy on this surface. I'm just going to, in a minute. This is the little budgie quilt. It's a little bit temperamental, and you can see how much it picks up hairs pretty well straight away. But I love the fine detail that you can get just out of this little guy here.
Which is your favorite brand for brushes, Janine?
It's the ASH, which I think is Ashen Hanover or something like that. They're a British brand. I think you can still get them online. They have maintained probably the strongest point, which I'm very fussy about out of anything that I
Could you
own.
say the name again?
It's an ASH. It's like 3 letters, but I think it's Ashen Hanover or something like that.
You're
I can
writing
find
it down, don't you, Dorothy?
I
can see the
give it to
attitude.
Dorothy. I
Yeah,
can give it
that's
to
great.
Dorothy afterwards.
I have
and-
some of my days as a student on the School of Arts. They were Raphael, and just like you said, I was 24. I am 62, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Make the maths. They
Well, this
last
is the
forever.
Raphael. This one's a Raphael, and I've
Yeah.
had it a long time. I don't know if you can see that there.
Yeah.
But of course, it's sable. I don't love the synthetic brushes so much, but
Janine, sorry, can you see the name again?
it's the ASH. It's 3 initials, and I think it's Ashen Hanover, something like that. But I can look it up for you.
Hanover.
Yeah, I can look it up for you and send it through later if you like.
Because I
And
can't.
then you can't find it. I'll have a look and find it. So taking care of nibs, I don't actually take care of my nibs that well, I've got to say. I give them a wipe with a tissue at the end. You'll see there's still a little bit of residual in there. I like to leave a little bit of residual in my pen because it helps the nib take up the ink next time around. So whilst I'm pretty fastidious with my brushes, I don't really worry too much about my nibs. For these in the pen that I designed, this whole thing comes out. It's a good idea, basically to wipe it all out so you don't actually get anything up inside it. But that's about as much as I do with my nibs. And as I said before, I tend to really stick with the antique ones more than anything else. The modern ones today, unless it's, one of the ones that was designed by Brian Walker, one of the principal nibs, they tend to not be manufactured as well as what they used to be, and so they don't write in the same way that the beautiful old ones just connect with the page and are gorgeous. So they're not that hard to find. if you're prepared to look around. And I think, you know, that can be really quite something. So that's probably about as much as I was going to show. I can keep writing if you want, but I think we're getting close to the time. And I hope that it was interesting just to watch how I go about things. Of course, I do all kinds of other things, but in an hour I thought, well, I would just try to show you a little bit of what I do. Sorry, Tom, that there was not much formal writing, but it's not really that type of session, you know, just in terms of showing people stuff. So yeah, that'll give you a little bit of an idea. That's just one approach. I've got lots of approaches to how I work, and I like to just mix it up a little bit is really where I come from. But you can't tell me this is not beautiful. Just to look at this is just beautiful. In my heart, I'm really moved by it. Any other questions anyone's got?
Okay, I found the website. It's in the chat. Handover.co.uk.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. No questions?
Just one comment, Janine.
Yes.
Just the word that you wrote, and you said you wrote the word words. Is that right?
Yes, down here.
Yes. And just looking at the just the subtlety of those marks compared to the ones you were doing, you know, when you were just doing the petal shapes. They're
Yes,
beautiful.
it changes
It
the nature of it.
And just adding those very fine strokes as well. It's very, it's lovely. And I think I totally agree. The color that comes through, the subtlety of the colors are really beautiful. Yeah, so thank you for sharing these techniques. Really beautiful.
No problem at all. I think, you know, there's something about when it's the reason why I wanted to write using symbol, because when we write, the rhythm comes from the words that you're using. There's a natural changing rhythm and flow that happens that doesn't happen when you're just making shapes on a page. And so, you know, there's quite a distinct difference in the contrast and the level of interest that you see when it's symbol as writing versus symbol as pattern.
Very much so.
I can see Tom's asking me something, but I can't see on my screen exactly.
He's saying, can you point out where the W, O, R, and D are?
Yes, I can. So this is a W here. This is an O. This is an R. This is a D. This is an S. And then I started to write something else. Words, M-E. M-A. I can't remember what I started to write now. I didn't finish writing, so I'm not sure what I was writing. I stopped, but I was just basically showing you the second contrast of writing other words over the top.
It's interesting to see that the petals move a lot more when you are forming them into words. It's like they came alive.
Yes, because here it's very still. You know, it's literally a pattern. And here you've got the ebb and flow of writing.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Which
there is a feeling of the movement and the flow. Very nice.
I'm just going to try to light it up a bit better so you can see the colouring properly, because look at all those little subtle things that happen in here, you know. I'm sorry that I'm not technology savvy and set up better, but this is my first time ever trying to film myself doing anything with the phone in my face while I'm working. So it's quite an interesting thing. But even this graduation here of you know, the bronze, I think it's just gorgeous. I highly recommend the Artistic Isle watercolors. So she makes these little palettes specifically for me, and I pay more to have them hand mulled and mixed and sent out. Of course, I haven't done any for a long time because money's not great at the moment. But basically, this is what enables me to roll my brush through. If you use mount board, I should just tell you one last thing. Some people tell you to use a mount board for the purpose of palleting your brush. And by palleting, I mean forming a, oops, I'm just going to get my brush back here. Forming a point. But if you try to form a point on here, I'm just going to re-wet this. So let's say I just puddle some paint in here. So my brush is thick and messy, and I want to roll it on here to get to a point. But you can see what happens is that I waste half of my paint. And so even though this is a technique that many people swear by, and you'll see I got a beautiful point, but what I lose is the paint that I've paid a lot of money for. So I still prefer this process of palleting in here. And you can see I've still got a beautiful point, but I leave the paint where it belongs, which is in the ceramic dish.
Good tip.
So, sorry, what was that?
No, it's a good tip.
Yeah, good tip, because this is how I was first taught when I was younger, and I end up with some beautiful mat board pages, but I wasted a lot of paint, and paint's very expensive to buy, so I bear in mind that I'd rather have it in the palette where I've got it for a long time, except if a mouse comes along and starts eating it off your table.
Does it dry?
Sorry, does it dry in the ceramic dish, do you mean?
Yes.
Yes, so I will, that's why the paints were essentially left out. I will leave this out so it dries off the surface.
But you put a tap on top when you end up working.
I've got
okay.
these, let me just show you here. So this has a little lid.
Yes.
They all
And don't you
stack up.
ever have mold?
No, I let them dry first.
Okay, you let them dry first.
I let them dry first,
Okay.
then I put the lid on, and then everything's fine. If you put the lid on when it's wet like this, you're more likely to get mold. But I think
Yes,
also Artistic Isle may add, you know, something natural to help with the mold as well. And I know, you know, Agallo Colours from Assisi in Italy, who also do beautiful paints. She adds honey to hers, and they tend not to have any problems either. Hers are more traditional colour range though, and I really just love this woman from Artistic Isle. She mixes all her own things, and I just love the way that she comes up with all these really interesting colours straight from the dish, and I can just work. You know, I'm not sort of there going, oh, I want to make this colour today. I just let the paint do what the paint does.
Great.
So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the ideas that I take through my work. Obviously, I've done a lot of pointed pen in the past, and probably, Tom, now I've got a little video going, I can probably do you some Vanderbilt. But yeah, I thought it would just be, instead of doing a project or something else, I really just thought I would share a bit of me. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the Australians in particular, because it's the witching hour.
Thank you, Janine. That was awesome.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Yes, thank you.